I'll tell you a story about my friend, Jake. What happened to him will make you rethink everything you think you know about love, trust, and betrayal. But what he did at the end will shock you. Jake was the kind of guy you didn't worry about. Calm, solid, the type who paid his bills on time, held the door for strangers, and could fix anything in the house with duct tape and sheer will. He lived in Indianapolis, the quieter suburbs, where yards stayed mowed and barbecues with neighbors were a summer ritual. He met Lindsay at a charity fundraiser for local youth programs. She was all charm, big smiles, fast wit, the kind of beauty that didn't scream for attention but demanded it anyway. She was different from the women Jake had dated before. She had ambition. She worked in event planning and always seemed to be on the go, meetings, mixers, client dinners. Jake liked that about her. Her independence was magnetic. They moved fast. Within a year, they were married. A small wedding. Her idea. She said she didn't want to waste money on performative nonsense. Looking back, that line stuck with him in the worst way. Things were good in the beginning. Really good. Jake had just launched his own remodeling business, and Lindsay supported him, at least, at first. She said all the right things. That she believed in him. That she didn't mind the long hours or the tight budget because it was temporary. One day, we'll be set, she would say. We just have to grind for a little while. Jake worked like a man possessed. 6 days a week, 10 hours a day. He poured everything into the business, his savings, his energy, his time. And Lindsay? Well, Lindsay started upgrading. New clothes. Better hair appointments. A leased BMW she said she needed to impress clients. Image matters in my field, she told him, and he didn't argue. He trusted her. But something shifted. At first, it was just the little things. She stopped asking how his day was. When he spoke about work, her eyes would drift to her phone. She stopped leaving him notes in his lunch, the ones that once read things like, "Proud of you," or, "You've got this." She stopped sleeping in. She'd be out the door earlier than usual, often without breakfast or even saying goodbye. Jake started telling himself stories to explain it away. She was just tired. Work was demanding. Maybe she was preoccupied about something. He didn't want to nag. That wasn't his way. He believed love meant trust, and trust meant giving space. Then the late nights started. At first, it was once or twice a week. Lindsay would text around 6 p.m. to say she had to stay late for a client dinner. These rich jerks always want to negotiate over wine, she joked once. Jake chuckled, but the words felt hollow. Over time, the late nights became routine. She started coming home around 10, then 11. Sometimes later. She never looked guilty. Just tired. And her tiredness became the end of every conversation. One night, she came home with a perfume Jake didn't recognize. It was sharp. Expensive. Not her usual vanilla and lavender blend. When he asked, she said, it was a gift from a client, one of the women. She didn't elaborate, and Jake didn't press. But the scent stayed with him all night, like a ghost between them in bed. Then the phone thing changed. Lindsay used to leave it anywhere. Now, it was always on her or locked with a passcode Jake didn't know. It's a security thing, she said. We're dealing with sensitive client info. You get it, right? Jake nodded. Of course, he got it. He always tried to get it. That's who he was. Still, he started feeling off. Not angry. Not sad. Just adrift. Like something was being eroded under his feet, slowly, every day. The connection, the intimacy, even the casual humor they used to share, it all seemed replaced with silence and avoidance. And then came the Friday she didn't come home until nearly 2 a.m. She claimed the dinner ran late, and her phone had died. Jake had sat in the dark for hours, TV muted, listening for her car. He never confronted her. He just smiled and said, "Glad you made it home safe." But inside, the air shifted. He started noticing patterns. Her workouts were suddenly more frequent, and always at odd hours. Her clothes had changed too, more fitted, more designer. She stopped using the joint credit card for gas or groceries. Instead, there were vague ATM withdrawals and charges Jake didn't recognize from places they'd never visited. That gnawing feeling took root in Jake's chest. It wasn't full-blown suspicion yet, but it was something darker than doubt. A creeping anxiety that refused to go away. Still, he didn't want to jump to conclusions. He told himself he was just being paranoid. That every couple goes through lulls. That maybe the spark fades and that doesn't mean betrayal. But deep down, Jake knew something was wrong. And the worst part? He was scared to find out what it was. It was a Sunday morning when the first undeniable crack showed through the shell Jake had so carefully kept intact. The sun was up, casting soft light across their modest Indianapolis home. Lindsay was already out, having left for an early brunch with the girls. She'd kissed his cheek briefly before leaving, her eyes barely meeting his. Her hair was styled too well for a casual Sunday. Her makeup was flawless. She wore heels. That was the moment something lodged itself in Jake's gut, something he couldn't ignore. He tried to shake it. He told himself it was ridiculous to question her over a brunch outfit. Maybe it was just how women dressed these days. Maybe he was getting old, out of touch. But no matter how much he tried to reason it away, the knot in his stomach remained. He wandered around the house for a while, restless. The kind of restlessness that had nothing to do with energy and everything to do with unease. He went to grab a glass of water and noticed her phone charger was still plugged into the wall. Her second phone charger, the one she kept in the kitchen. Odd. She never forgot it. Something drew his attention to the trash. He hadn't taken it out yet that morning, and as he passed by, a glint caught his eye. It was subtle. A small square, shiny, metallic. He pulled the bag up, felt around, and there it was. A foil square wrapper. Condom packaging. He stood there staring at it for what felt like minutes, his mind refusing to register the simple logic. They hadn't used condoms in years. Not since early in their relationship. Lindsay had insisted on switching to birth control for comfort and spontaneity. This wasn't his. He knew that with cold, mathematical certainty. And unless it came from someone else's pocket and accidentally landed in their trash, something he knew was nearly impossible, then the answer was staring back at him. That was the moment Jake's brain stopped rationalizing. Suddenly, other small things came rushing to the surface. How Lindsay always turned her phone screen away from him when they sat together. How she suddenly had more energy at night than she used to, especially after a long day. How she began locking her laptop even when just stepping away for a drink of water. She once told him that she didn't like putting up digital barriers in a relationship. That was her line, one he had believed, and maybe she had too, once. That wrapper felt like a slap. Not just the object itself, but everything it represented. All the missing time. All the new clothes. All the unexplained late nights and empty reassurances. He didn't mention the wrapper when she returned from brunch. She looked happy, flushed from laughter or maybe wine. Her lipstick was fresher than it should have been after a 2-hour meal. Her phone never left her hand. She gave him a side hug and said something about feeling sleepy. He nodded, watched her ascend the stairs, and wondered how many times she had come home looking like this, only now he was finally seeing it. That night, Jake lay awake for hours. He didn't ask questions. He didn't snoop. Not yet. But everything was different now. Every laugh felt fake. Every yawn rehearsed. Her texts came with more typos now, more frantic energy. Her excuses started piling up, getting harder to swallow. The next morning, he watched her get ready for work. She put on a fitted blazer he'd never seen before. Her blouse was silk. Her shoes had red soles. Jake knew those weren't cheap. She claimed it was a sample from a client. He nodded along, his face calm, his mind on fire. Then came the social media post. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and he was scrolling mindlessly through Instagram, just killing time between job site visits. One of Lindsay's co-workers, someone Jake had only met once, posted a group photo from what was supposedly a client dinner the previous Friday night. It showed the team sitting around a long table at a restaurant far outside downtown. Lindsay wasn't seated next to the women from her team. She was leaning close to a man Jake didn't recognize. A man in a navy suit, square jawline, tan, and smiling too widely. She had her hand resting on his arm, and her face was turned toward him, lips parted as if mid-laugh. She had told Jake that night she was exhausted and needed to crash early. It wasn't just the photo. It was the comments. A friend had replied, "You two look so good together." Fire, the coworker hadn't responded to that comment, but the post remained. No denial. No clarification. No removal of the message. Jake's chest tightened. He realized something that frightened him more than the photo itself. He wasn't even angry. Not yet. He felt empty. Like he was slowly detaching, turning into an observer in his own life. A man watching his house fill with smoke but too stunned to reach for water. That night, he stood in the bathroom while she showered. He stared at her phone charging on the sink counter. Locked. Face ID. No chance to access it. But his mind was already shifting gears. He wouldn't accuse her. Not now. He wouldn't ask vague questions or hope for vague answers. He needed something real. Something that could cut through her lies and leave no room for denial. Something she wouldn't be able to gaslight or twist or talk her way out of. He needed proof. And he was going to find it, quietly. You have no idea what happened at the end of the story. Once Jake crossed the mental threshold from suspicion to strategy, everything shifted. The man who once believed in blind trust began to approach his marriage like a blueprint, carefully, precisely, deliberately. He didn't panic. He didn't confront. He knew that every careless question could tip her off, and he wasn't about to let that happen. The first step was routine. He picked up a second phone, a simple, prepaid model, nothing traceable. He kept it in his toolbox in the garage. She never went in there. The garage was his domain, a place she barely acknowledged, which suddenly made it the safest spot in the house. He installed a small camera in the living room. It looked like a phone charger, tucked beneath the outlet closest to the couch where she often took late-night calls. Jake didn't expect much from it, but he wanted to create a habit, a system. One that would help him track what he couldn't see during his long days on site. Then came the digital digging. Jake had never once checked Lindsay's laptop. But now, while she slept one Saturday afternoon, claiming exhaustion from another client lunch, he sat at the dining table with her computer and a cup of cold coffee. He knew her password. She had shared it once, long ago, and he remembered because he remembers everything. She hadn't changed it. What he found wasn't obvious, no damning emails, no romantic messages left open. But there were clues. A separate Chrome profile. Saved passwords for hotel booking sites under usernames he didn't recognize. A calendar with vague events blocked off, labeled only with initials like PM or JB. He screenshotted everything and emailed it to himself. Then came the credit card statements. Not the joint account, he already knew those inside and out. It was the side account, the one she insisted on keeping, just in case. He had always respected her independence. Now, that account showed charges from boutique hotels, rooftop bars, and a high-end jewelry store. A necklace Jake never saw. A bracelet he never touched. What unsettled him most wasn't just the locations, it was the timing. These purchases often coincided with nights she claimed to be working late or out of town for business. One hotel charge fell on the same weekend Jake had been out of town for a contracting convention. He had driven 6 hours each way and called her every night. She'd sounded sweet, even worried he was working too hard. He began making mental notes of everything, her tone, her patterns, even the scent of her perfume. Some evenings she came home smelling different. Not of unfamiliar perfume, but of cologne. Subtle but unmistakable. She'd change quickly, sometimes showering immediately. She claimed she felt gross after long client meetings. Jake nodded each time, smiling like a fool, heart heavy like stone. He knew that just watching her wasn't enough. One evening, as Lindsay showered, Jake went to her handbag. He didn't rifle through it like a man desperate for a clue. He moved with calm precision. Inside, he found another phone, smaller, newer, unfamiliar. It was off. No password. When he turned it on, he discovered it had barely any apps. Just messaging and a browser. The contacts were minimal, but one name appeared often, Jason B. Dozens of messages. All deleted. Except for one. A selfie. Lindsay in a hotel mirror, dressed in something sheer, barely there. The timestamp made Jake's chest tighten. It was the same night she claimed to be visiting her sister in Cincinnati. He saved the image. Transferred it to his secret phone. Then turned her burner phone off, returned it, and went about the evening like nothing had happened. He started driving by her office during late hours. He watched from across the street, parked behind an unlit warehouse. Most nights the lights were off by 7 p.m., despite her claiming to work until 10. One night, he followed her. She wasn't aware. She wasn't careful. She didn't have to be. She believed he was too distracted with work and too trusting to question her movements. She met someone in the parking lot of a high-rise hotel. It was dark, but Jake recognized her walk, her hair, her bag. The man she met was tall, dressed like he worked in finance. They didn't kiss. No overt signs of romance. But the way she smiled, Jake hadn't seen that smile in months. She walked with him into the building. Jake waited in his truck for 3 hours. She didn't come out. The next morning, she was home by 8. She kissed him on the cheek and told him she had fallen asleep at her desk. He pretended to believe her. Made her coffee. Then saved the dashcam footage to a hard drive in his garage. Still, Jake wasn't satisfied. He needed more. He contacted an old friend from college, now a private investigator. They weren't close anymore, but they had shared enough beers and broken relationships to trust each other. Jake paid in cash. Told him to be discreet. The investigator didn't ask questions. Just dates, names, and addresses. 2 weeks later, Jake had a manila envelope in his hands. Photos. Dates. License plate logs. Receipts. Jake flipped through them slowly. There she was, his wife, wrapped in someone else's arms at a wine bar. Walking hand in hand through a parking garage. Wearing a dress he had never seen before. She was not just cheating. She was living another life. He felt hollow. Not angry. Not surprised. Just, validated. All the pieces were in place. Now he had everything he needed. The betrayal wasn't just emotional. It was strategic. Calculated. She had used his money, his time, his loyalty. She hadn't just broken vows, she'd taken from him, piece by piece, until there was almost nothing left. But Jake wasn't broken. Not yet. The man who built homes for others was now building something else, a plan. One she wouldn't see coming. One that would remind her just how much she had underestimated him. And he would wait. Patiently. Because when it came to getting even, Jake believed in craftsmanship. Jake didn't expect the truth to hurt as much as it did. After all, he'd spent weeks preparing for it, tracking her, collecting evidence, connecting dots that only a blind man could ignore. And still, the moment it all came crashing down, it felt like someone had reached inside his chest and ripped out something irreplaceable. Not his heart, exactly. But maybe the version of himself that had once believed in forever. It happened on a Thursday. He'd taken the day off, claiming a supplier issue out in Bloomington. Lindsay didn't question it. She kissed him on the cheek, said something about yoga after work, and left in her navy blazer and pencil skirt. She looked radiant. She always did these days, glowing in a way that didn't belong to him anymore. That glow had been repurposed for someone else. It wasn't just makeup or confidence. It was the reflection of being desired, just not by the man she married. Jake waited until she pulled out of the driveway, then returned inside. He had already wired the home office with a hidden camera. It had been recording her phone calls for over a week, but there hadn't been anything concrete, just whispers, half conversations, pauses that made his skin crawl. But now, today, he had something better. He checked the camera feed one last time, then drove downtown. The hotel was one of those mid-level boutique places, stylish without being flashy, perfect for discretion. The front desk clerk didn't ask questions when Jake approached. He looked official, wore work boots and a polo, and carried a clipboard like he belonged. "Maintenance issue," he said. Room 602 had been flagged in the system for air conditioning problems. He needed to inspect it. The keycard worked. When the elevator doors opened on the 6th floor, he moved with robotic calm. Each step toward room 602 was a slow heartbeat, echoing in his ears. He could feel the weight of it pressing against his chest. Not fear. Not even anger. Just inevitability. He knocked once. No answer. He swiped the keycard and entered quietly. The room wasn't empty. He stood just past the threshold and took it in. Lindsay's heels were by the bed. Her purse on the dresser. A man's jacket hung over the chair. The sounds from the bathroom were unmistakable. The shower was running. Voices, muffled but intimate. The kind of closeness that didn't belong to strangers. The kind that once belonged to him. Jake didn't need to see more. He closed the door gently, walked back down the hallway, returned the keycard to the front desk, and thanked them with a nod. No drama. No scene. He had his confirmation. But the worst came later. That night, when Lindsay came home, she was glowing again. Her hair was damp, the scent of unfamiliar cologne clinging to her skin. She told him her yoga class had been intense. He listened. Smiled. And excused himself to the garage. Inside, he sat at the workbench and pulled out the manila envelope, the one the private investigator had given him. He slid the latest photos into the stack. One in particular made his stomach turn. Lindsay, laughing on the edge of a hotel bed, her hand on the thigh of a man Jake now knew too well. Jason Barrett. He wasn't just anyone. Jason was a client. A man Jake had done work for months ago, a kitchen remodel, all custom work. Jason had been friendly, generous, even invited Jake and Lindsay to dinner after the job was finished. Jake had turned it down. Now he understood why the invitation had been extended. It was betrayal wrapped in courtesy. The reality of it hit like a freight train. Jason had been in their home. He had shaken Jake's hand. Praised his craftsmanship. And all the while, he'd been working his way into Jake's marriage. Jake looked through his receipts, notes, and photos again. Each one a nail in the coffin of who they used to be. But what shattered him wasn't the sex. It wasn't even the lies. It was the money. Over the past 6 months, Lindsay had drained over $15,000 from their savings account. Some under the guise of work expenses, others labeled as miscellaneous travel. A closer look at her email showed receipts for flights, gifts, spa appointments. All of it for Jason. All of it using funds Jake had worked overtime to earn. She hadn't just betrayed him emotionally. She had used him. He remembered the conversations they'd had about cutting back. About maybe selling the truck. About postponing that trip to Charleston they had been planning for 2 years. She said they needed to be smart, that times were tough. She said she wanted to help save for a home extension, something for the future. That future had been rerouted to hotel rooms and private dinners with another man. Jake felt something inside him rupture. He wasn't just hurt. He was done. The weight of it settled into his bones. Not the heartbreak. Not the betrayal. But the clarity. He would never get back the hours he spent trying to fix something she had already decided to break. He would never be repaid for the generosity she exploited. But what he had now was worth more than revenge. He had the truth. And with the truth came a kind of freedom. He stopped looking for signs. He stopped hoping she'd change. He stopped wondering if he was imagining things. There was no room for illusion anymore. She was unfaithful. She was selfish. She was gone in every way but physically. But he was still there. And that gave him power. The man she thought she had broken was already rebuilding himself, this time, not for her. Not for anyone else. Just for himself. And quietly, in the garage, Jake began drawing up a new set of plans. Not for a home. Not for a remodel. But for the most important design he had ever created, a blueprint for revenge. Jake didn't rush. That was the key. If there was anything he had learned from years of working in remodeling, it was that real success came from patience, not speed. Measure twice, cut once. And when it came to revenge, he planned to measure a dozen times before ever making the first move. He started with the most basic truth: Lindsay had no idea he knew. That ignorance was his most valuable asset, and he guarded it fiercely. He kept smiling, kept making coffee, kept asking how her workday had gone. He even volunteered to take over more house chores, citing his flexible schedule. She appreciated it. Said it gave her more time to focus on herself. That was what she wanted, after all, more time to slip away. And Jake? He wanted her to feel safe. Untouchable. Powerful. That way, when everything crumbled, it would sting more. Shock harder. He contacted a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but a quiet, methodical one who specialized in high-conflict divorces and asset recovery. Jake chose him for his silence. For the way he read every document 3 times before making a single move. They met in private, off-site, at a coffee shop in a nearby town where Lindsay would never think to look. There, Jake laid out his plan, complete with photos, receipts, and timelines. The lawyer raised an eyebrow, impressed, and promised discretion. The first step: untangle their finances. Jake began shifting money without setting off alarms. He opened new accounts in his business name, moving small amounts daily under the guise of vendor payments. Lindsay never looked at the books. She never asked questions. She assumed Jake was struggling. He had started wearing older jeans and talking about tough clients. She didn't know he was quietly siphoning their remaining savings, redirecting investments, even freezing credit lines they shared. Next, he began liquidating assets she didn't even know they had. Tools, machinery, extra materials he'd stored away for future projects. All sold to trusted colleagues or long-term clients. Every transaction done in cash, logged in a small leather notebook he kept hidden beneath a false drawer in the garage. The money went into a safety deposit box at a bank she didn't know about. By the time he was finished, he had a nest egg ready, enough to walk away comfortably. Then came the psychological part. He changed small things. Tiny inconsistencies meant to plant confusion without arousing suspicion. Her car keys would be in the wrong drawer. Her favorite bottle of wine would vanish for days and then reappear unopened. She would find a blouse she hadn't worn in months freshly ironed in the laundry room, despite never putting it there. Once, she swore she left her hair straightener on the bathroom counter, but it was neatly placed in the drawer when she returned. It was all intentional. Jake wasn't just preparing for the confrontation, he was setting the stage. He wanted her on edge. Not paranoid, but off balance. Just enough to feel like she was the one starting to lose grip. And it worked. She began snapping more often. Misplacing things. Blaming herself. Then blaming him. Jake responded with calm indifference. Shrugged. Smiled. Offered to help her look. Suggested she take a break from work, maybe even a spa day. Anything to make her feel that she was being taken care of, just enough to keep her guilt at bay while he tightened the noose. He also changed how he spoke about Jason, the man she was seeing. Casually, he would mention how great it was that Jason had moved on, or that he heard Jason was planning a move out of town. None of it was true. But every lie Jake dropped was calculated to seed uncertainty. If Jason was leaving, what did that mean for Lindsay? What future had she invested in? What had she risked everything for? She never asked questions. Not out loud. But Jake could see it in her eyes. Then came the piece de resistance. Jake organized a reunion dinner. He told Lindsay he wanted to celebrate their anniversary. A quiet affair, just the two of them, at the same restaurant where he proposed. She lit up at the idea, perhaps thinking he was beginning to let go of his suspicions, or maybe she thought she'd finally succeeded in manipulating him into comfort. She accepted without hesitation. But that wasn't the real plan. Over the course of 2 weeks, Jake called in every favor he had. He invited friends, family, colleagues, even a few of Lindsay's co-workers. Said it was a surprise party. A thank you gathering. He rented a banquet room and told everyone to keep it secret. He paid for everything in advance. The catering. The flowers. Even the photographer. He wrote a speech. But not the kind of speech she would expect. He also scheduled the delivery of a particular envelope. One that contained every shred of evidence he had collected, photos, bank statements, emails, text logs, all of it. It would arrive at Jason's office 1 hour before the dinner, addressed from an anonymous source. Jake wanted Jason to read it before the party. He wanted the man who took everything from him to feel the walls closing in, too. He bought Lindsay a dress. Elegant, red, her favorite color. Left it with a note saying he couldn't wait to see her in it again. It was all part of the act. He even rented a luxury car for the night, picked her up himself, dressed in his best suit, smiling like a man who believed he had it all. Because in that moment, he did. He had the truth. He had the plan. And he had the final move. She looked radiant that night. Hair done. Nails perfect. Eyes glowing. She had no idea she was walking into her own downfall. Jake held the door for her. Walked her inside the venue. Smiled as their guests shouted surprise. And in the center of that room, beneath the warm lights and smiling faces, he knew everything was exactly as it should be. He was done being the victim. It was almost time to tell the truth. Jake had rehearsed the moment in his head dozens of times. Not the words, those didn't matter as much, but the energy, the effect. This wasn't about cruelty. It wasn't even about exposing Lindsay in front of others. It was about truth. Undeniable, unfiltered, and absolutely unforgettable truth. It was about standing in the wreckage she created and refusing to be buried in it. The restaurant was softly lit, dressed in candlelight and warm tones. A banquet room nestled in the back, reserved weeks in advance. The decorations were tasteful. The wine flowed. Everyone assumed they were there to celebrate a quiet man's undying love for his wife. That was exactly the illusion Jake wanted to maintain. Guests filled the room, offering hugs and polite congratulations. Jake's family was there, his mother, his older brother, even his retired uncle from Louisville who rarely left the house. A few of Lindsay's friends had shown up too, the ones she rarely saw these days. Her co-workers greeted her with wide smiles and perfunctory small talk. Jason did not show up. Jake knew he wouldn't. Not after receiving the envelope. That was part of the plan. Jake watched Lindsay from across the room as she basked in the glow of attention. She wore the red dress he had chosen for her, and she wore it well. She moved through the room with practiced grace, smiling for the camera, pausing for compliments, acting every bit the devoted wife of the hour. She thought she'd won. She thought she had manipulated her way into the perfect cover, public affection, social approval, and a husband too naive to see the truth. Her performance was flawless. Jake let her enjoy it. He waited until the dinner was served. Until the last course had been cleared. Until the champagne had been poured. The photographer was positioned near the front, guests leaning forward in their chairs, ready for the customary toast. Jake stood slowly. He didn't tap the glass. He didn't raise his voice. He simply walked to the center of the room with a small envelope in his hand. He began by thanking everyone for coming, and they applauded politely. Then he turned to Lindsay, called her name, and everyone's heads turned with him. She looked up, beaming, red lips curved into the smile she had used so many times before. Then she saw the envelope. It was a thin, manila rectangle. Unassuming. Ordinary. Except for what it carried inside. Jake explained that this wasn't a celebration of their marriage. Not anymore. It had once been, but now it was something else entirely. This was a reckoning. Not for him, but for her. He began listing the dates. The lies. The hotel charges. The secret phone. The private messages. The cash withdrawals. The spa days that were never attended. The conference calls that never existed. The dinners for clients who had no idea they were supposedly being entertained. Each line landed like a stone dropped in water, silent at first, but rippling across the room. Lindsay's expression froze. Her smile dropped. Her hand clenched the stem of her glass so tightly Jake thought it might snap. She tried to speak, to stop the unraveling, but Jake kept going. He told them about Jason. The man she had been seeing. The man who had accepted his hospitality, praised his work, and slept with his wife. He told them about the nights she claimed to be working, while instead she was living a second life funded by his earnings, his trust, his sacrifices. He didn't yell. He didn't cry. He delivered the truth with surgical precision. Then he handed her the envelope. Inside were copies of the photos. The receipts. A screenshot of the hotel security camera footage. The room key records. Her own text messages. One, in particular, stood out, her words to Jason, saying she couldn't wait to finally leave the handyman for someone who could actually give her the life she deserved. That quote hit harder than any of the others. The guests shifted uncomfortably. The murmurs grew louder. A few people stood, unsure of whether to stay or leave. Lindsay sat paralyzed, the envelope heavy in her lap. Jake ended his speech not with a dramatic flourish, but with a calm announcement. He had filed for divorce. He had frozen all shared accounts. He had reclaimed every penny that had not yet been spent. He had sold the home, under his name alone, for cash, well before this night. And he had removed her access to his business, his assets, his life. Effective immediately, she was on her own. The room fell silent. The kind of silence that feels final, absolute. Then someone clapped. One slow clap. Then another. Then more. Jake didn't acknowledge the applause. He simply turned, walked out of the banquet room, stepped into the cool night air, and exhaled the breath he'd been holding for months. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. Behind him, Lindsay sat in the wreckage of a narrative she had crafted so carefully. The sympathy she had manipulated. The facade she had built. All of it collapsed. She had underestimated the man she thought was blind. And now, she was the one left stunned, exposed, and alone. The banquet room faded into memory almost as quickly as Jake stepped away from it. The applause, the gasps, the flashbulbs from phones capturing Lindsay's collapse, it all became background noise in the rearview mirror of a life he no longer needed to claim. He didn't drive home that night. He didn't go back to the house they once shared. He drove straight to a quiet property on the edge of Carmel, a place he had purchased under a holding company name months earlier. It was modest, but peaceful. A small lake bordered the edge of the land. A workshop stood next to the main house, filled with tools, wood, machines, his real comforts. Everything was paid in full, off the grid in every way that mattered. He unlocked the door, entered the silence, and took a long breath. No perfume. No hidden phones. No unfamiliar cologne. Just clean air and peace. Jake didn't feel triumphant. Not exactly. What he felt was closer to clarity. A deep, cleansing kind of awareness. The kind that only comes when a storm has passed and left behind a landscape stripped bare, exposing everything that once festered beneath the surface. Lindsay moved out of their old house within days. She didn't fight the divorce. She didn't contest the financial settlements. Jake's lawyer had made it clear that doing so would mean public exposure of everything, the documents, the photos, even the testimony from the private investigator. She signed quietly, begrudgingly. Humiliation had a way of taming even the most volatile egos. Word spread quickly through their circles. Friends who once looked up to Lindsay for her poise and ambition now looked at her with thinly veiled pity or, worse, curiosity. Her professional life took a hit, too. A few clients cancelled contracts. Whispers traveled faster than facts, and in this case, the facts had receipts. But Jake had no interest in vengeance beyond what he'd already done. He didn't care to punish her further. He simply wanted distance. Space. A future that had nothing to do with the ashes of a past he had buried with precision. What surprised him most was what came next. Roughly a month after the dinner, Jake received a letter in a plain white envelope. No return address. No signature. Just a handwritten message inside, short and blunt. Jason Barrett had left the city. He didn't run. Not officially. But he sold his condo, liquidated his investment shares in the construction firm where he held a stake, and moved to a different state. His departure coincided, interestingly enough, with the timing of the envelope Jake had sent him, the one filled with all the evidence and a final note that said nothing but the word, "Congratulations." Apparently, Jason wasn't as bold without an audience. Once Lindsay was no longer a secret, once the facade fell away and responsibility entered the picture, he vanished. And Lindsay? She tried, subtly at first, to re-enter Jake's life. It started with a letter. A carefully worded apology that danced around specifics and leaned heavily on nostalgia. Then came a gift, a vintage tool set Jake had once admired in a catalog years ago. He hadn't spoken about it in ages, but she must have remembered. Or maybe she'd gone digging for anything that resembled the man she thought she could still manipulate. He returned the package unopened. The silence that followed was final. But that's not the twist. The real twist came in the form of a dinner. A quiet evening a few weeks later with a longtime friend named Tessa, someone from Jake's past who had been at the banquet but left before the speech. She called a week afterward, said she wanted to catch up. He agreed. No pressure. Just dinner. They met at a small restaurant, tucked into a corner of downtown. The place was warm, understated. The kind of place that didn't need a reputation to feel meaningful. They talked. They laughed. The conversation stretched past dessert and into closing time. Tessa had been through her own kind of betrayal. A divorce 2 years earlier, quiet but devastating. Her ex had left her for someone younger, newer. She understood loss, not just of love but of dignity. And maybe that's why she and Jake sat so comfortably across from each other. No pretense. No pretending. Jake realized that night that healing didn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it came slowly, like rain on a roof, steady, calming, unannounced. In the weeks that followed, they saw each other again. No labels. No expectations. Just two people sitting in the aftermath of broken promises, finding that something whole could still be built from the ruins. Jake didn't tell her everything at once. He didn't need to. She knew the headlines, and she didn't press for the details. She wasn't interested in his pain so much as his presence. That mattered. And one evening, while they watched the lake ripple under a lavender sky, Jake looked at her and realized something he hadn't dared believe until that moment. He had gotten the last laugh. Not because Lindsay had been exposed. Not because Jason had disappeared. Not even because his plan had worked flawlessly. But because he had walked through the fire and come out standing. Stronger. Smarter. Unapologetically himself. He didn't just survive. He evolved. And in the end, the most powerful revenge wasn't destroying someone else. It was rebuilding a life so beautiful, so full, so quietly triumphant, that no lie, no betrayal, no person could ever touch it again. So if you liked Jake's story, stick around. Because there are more. Not just his, but the stories of others who've been betrayed and came out wiser, tougher, and sharper than before. Sometimes, the end of a marriage is just the beginning of something better. And trust me, what happened next? You'd never believe it.